I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Ohian, the Biden administration's aspirations for high-speed rail fail to account for several realities, including a lack of customer demand, economic viability, and the impact on existing rail infrastructure. So how can Congress best safeguard taxpayer dollars when considering support for high-speed rail and other projects discussed today?
Chairman, important question and multi-parts to that. To conserve federal funding, we should prioritize projects on the basis of the amount of return that they can deliver to Americans. My testimony tried to provide sort of a four-step process that could be a blueprint for evaluating these types of projects and where they've gone wrong in the past, particularly in California. The business plan has to be detailed, and it really has to bring into account costs and risks. And fundamentally, what I see from where I sit as an academic is just the riskiness of these projects have just been so avoided, and that's something that really I think is to the detriment of us as Americans.
And in your testimony, you talk a little bit about Brightline from that. Is it the Vegas to California and how that private-public partnership and how Brightline can do it for less cost? Explain that.
Yes. So Brightline is building a 228-mile route from Southern California to Las Vegas at a projected cost of nearly two-thirds less than California high-speed rail project. So that's very striking because it shows that it can be done much more economically, and it can be done much more economically when the right incentives are in place, which is, of course, what happens with the private sector. So I think when it comes to high-speed rail, we have to really temper the idea of finding the routes and segments where there's sufficient demand and finding routes where there's relatively few risks and where we can build it at a reasonable cost.
If the California high-speed rail project was initiated as a true public-private partnership where the private sector would assume more of the financial risk in the construction and operating of that system, how different would things look today if the California high-speed rail?
Well, I suspect it would be very different. In the private sector, one can't imagine not delivering revenue for 15 years and going over budget by a factor of 4. It just boggles the mind.
In your testimony, it talks about that plan, the rail plan for California high-speed rail, and that was legally required, and the plan wasn't out there, and then it went to the bond, and the voters voted on it. Did anybody go to jail for that?
I do not know.
To me, they misled the voters.
In my opinion, yes.
At least, yes. Thank you again for being here. Ms. Mortensen, Texas is considering the development of high-speed passenger rail service between Dallas and Houston. What lessons can Texas and federal policymakers learn from California's high-speed rail experience?
Well, I think in the event we're working on Class 1 rail lines, I think a lot of cooperation up front and a real business understanding of what the risks will be. When we use someone else's right-of-way, we need to partner and we need to respect that they have rights and assets that they've built over time. Where we're building outside of that right-of-way, I think really understanding the risk that is involved in right-of-way and the optics of purchasing right-of-way that might sit for a long period of time and may disrupt family industries that have been around for generations. And so I think some of those risks may not have been at the forefront, but those kind of things do need to be thought about up front and really mitigated before the process starts.
Mayor Watson, I'm on the record supporting high-speed rail. I like the idea of that rail line between Houston and Dallas. I see the congestion on 45 and everything else. How do you feel about that project, and what do you know about that project?
Well, I don't know as much as maybe I should know about it, but what I do know is that I like the idea of when you don't have anything in terms of rail going between Dallas, that Metroplex, and Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex and the Houston area Metroplex, which are the 4th and 5th largest Metroplexes in the country. We need to have more there. I also like the idea that there may be some competition, I think that's a good thing, but I agree that what's going to be required is upfront collaboration up front, recognizing the risk and analyzing those completely so that people go into trying to mitigate those risks as opposed to learning about that after they start. I think the opportunity that Amtrak also provides as part of that is one that we ought to clearly look at because of what could be done perhaps more rapidly.
Thank you. My time has expired.